Salvage, a story by user Rantarian. Chapter 11. Victory for Some. "Adrian," Triafa repeated. "Adrian, are you there?" The four of them had been standing together, listening to Triafa chanting the human's name for what seemed far too long. Their expressions grew dimmer with every repetition. They knew that he had only so much air in that bag. "Adrian," Triafa began again. "Adrian, are you—"
"For fuck's sake, can a man suffocate in peace?"
came the reply at last, although the speaker seemed far weaker than the human that had left them.
"Doc, I don't mind telling you that I'm buggered."
The relief in the room was palpable. "We were getting worried," Cheer said. "You took longer than expected."
"I forgot the door code,"
Adrian explained.
God, it was getting harder and harder to breathe.
"If you forgot the door code, you would not have been able to get into the salvage ship," said Triafa, a question in her statement.
"About that," Adrian said, "I'm afraid I've cut a big hole in your door with a future sword I picked up."
"You damaged my starship?" Triafa exploded angrily. "How do you intend for me to fix that? And where is my video feed?"
"Oh, right,"
Adrian said, and after a moment the video feed was restored to show the ruined features of the human's face. Trickles of blood ran from the corners of his bloodshot eyes, and cheeks showed swelling and bruising. He looked like he'd been on the receiving end of brutal violence, but he still managed a weak grin.
"Your face!" Karr exclaimed. "What happened to you?"
"It seems that a walk in hard vacuum doesn't come cheaply," Triafa said curtly, "even for a human."
"I do feel like 2 pounds of shit in a 1 pound bag," Adrian agreed. "Listen, I don't think I'm up for another walk outside. Do we have any other options?"
"Are you feeling up to some computer work?" Triafa asked. Adrian grimaced.
"It doesn't sound like I'll have a choice."
Over the next 3 hours, while his condition worsened, Triafa had stepped Adrian through the keystrokes and commands required to enable remote access. From there, it was another hour of waiting and feeling sorry for himself before she had informed him that a vacuum suit had been configured for his own use, and another few minutes of trying to figure out her instructions to put it on. He wasn't feeling good at all. His body ached, his skin itched, and his senses and mind were failing him with increasing severity. None of this pointed to a condition that was going to go away anytime soon. Hard vacuum, zero pressure. Little wonder that he felt as though he had the bends. His body was now stronger than it ever had been, and it still felt like several kinds of shithouse. Good thing he wasn't still sporting the old model, or he'd almost certainly be dead. A fact that was good for his sense of humility, if nothing else.
"Triafa,"
he said as he steadied himself by the broken airlock. He was as ready as he could be to venture out there again, this time with air and suits for everyone.
"Do you know how to treat decompression sickness?"
"Such a thing is not uncommon on planets," she replied, "but we do not have the facilities to do so here." He paused, staring at the open flight deck.
"Triafa,"
he began. "I will have the others prepare a stasis pod for you until we can get you treated properly," she said. "I can't tell you how long that might be." He nodded to the camera and then set out across the flight deck one more time. On Triafa's orders, Karr and Zrypov had rushed to ready one of the remaining 3 stasis pods, running through the brief systems checks as they pushed it on a hover lifter towards the airlock Adrian would be returning by. They knew it was bad. The Kortai had explained to them that there was no way she could know how dire his condition was, and that in any case, all instances of Kortai researchers exposing human test subjects to hard vacuum had never been experimental in nature. But Adrian had seemed to think his condition was bad, and that was all the information she needed to ready the only medical aid she could offer. Altogether, they had waited outside of the airlock, counting down the moments before the pressure equalized, and rushing to help the forlorn human as best they could manage, easing him from his vacuum suit and into the stasis pod. Karr had been horrified to see he looked even worse in person than he had on the video feed. After his victory against 1,000 or so hunters, it had been difficult to imagine the human was even capable of dying. It wasn't hard to imagine it anymore.
"Don't worry," she told him as he laid back into the pod. "We won't let you die."
"I know you won't,"
he said, smiling wanly as the pod closed. Once she was alone, Triafa breathed a sigh of relief, and allowed herself a moment to experience satisfaction. 1,000 hunters repelled, all of their equipment seized, and being inventoried by the others as she worked, and the human was in the stasis pod where he belonged. Added to the fact that Beckmer was imprisoned, and the key to the Zoddersill and the resulting reward was nearly in her grasp alone, and it was hard to imagine a greater success. The air for the flight deck would need to be recaptured, but with 10 full troop ships at her disposal, it would be easy to harvest the atmosphere of the planet below. Besides the 3 remaining slave soldiers, only one thing remained to be taken care of before her victory would be complete. Something needed to happen to Beckmer. 65 million years ago. This is my last entry as shiplord of the Zoddersill. Za spoke into the recorder, watching the computer translate his voice into text record. We have taken what we could of her and now leave her in high orbit of Afrag, under the care of our last exterminator drone. He paused for effect, but the delay was not recorded by the software. He frowned at it, irritated that his transcription held none of his emphasis or pauses. It would all be transformed into dry words on a screen, devoid of any of the emotion he felt. It was a notable event for a shiplord to abandon his vessel, and he couldn't help but feel he was betraying some part of himself in doing so. The Zoddersill has served us well, he continued. But the time has come to make a new start. Time will tell whether or not we are successful. But one thing is certain. We will not be returning to the Zoddersill while I still live. He took a steadying breath. To this end, I am updating the biometric command profiles to use the entire homeworld genetic listing. Anyone with a recognized sequence will simply need to sit in the command chair. I hope it may still serve you in your own time of need. There was a final pause, as he examined the ship from its interior sensors. Knowing that he had walked every corridor, understood every part of every system, the Zoddersill had been his to know. That was what it meant to be shiplord. Za out. Chapter 12. The Backup Plan. Ultimatum from Hunters. Demand all humans be turned over, else, quote, swarm of swarms, end quote, will raid known human locations. All ships, stations, carrying human passengers, advised. Jettison immediately. Notification ends. The message was succinct. Its timing was undeniable. The human, Adrian Saunders, had managed to enrage the Hunters beyond any point they had ever been angered before, and now there was every chance that they would make another attack on the Zoddersill, and soon. Triafa's chances of success were looking a little bit dimmer than they had a few moments ago. The only thing she had in her favor was that there was no way the slave soldiers could have learned about this yet. What to do, she asked herself, although she felt rather more out of her depth than she was letting herself admit. As far as she could work out, she had a few options. First, she could run away. That would be ideal for her survival, but it would also be giving up on the Zoddersill entirely, and may lead to the ancient starship falling into the hands of the Hunters. Second, she could maintain operations here, but drop Adrian Saunders off with a Directorate patrol. Then she'd be rid of the human, but the Hunters would have no reason to give up on the Zoddersill, and she would be completely without any real protection. Thirdly, she could defy the Directorate, risking her own future at this point, and heal Adrian Saunders, knowing that he was still the biggest target for Hunters in the entire galaxy, and knowing that he had limited capacity to defend them in the short term. 3 options, all terrible. Is this what it's like to be him? She wondered aloud. Every option is terrible. Every possibility is completely fucked. She reclined back into her chair, her eyes closed in thought. This was exactly the sort of situation that needed some sort of mad plan to get out of with all of her victories intact. But she was a creature of logic, and what she needed was a deranged savage. What do I know? She asked herself, opening her eyes. I know that the Directorate have ordered Beckmer's crew, and therefore me, to hand over the human. I know that that human has single-handedly defeated a Hunter invasion. I know that if he's not here, I'm likely to find myself the target of another, without anyone here to do the fighting. And there it was. The idea. The completely, wonderfully insane idea. Let me be blunt with you, Triafa said to the assembled soldiers. I have been ordered to turn Adrian Saunders over to the Directorate. They stared at her, glancing at one another as though waiting to see who would speak first. Triafa didn't give them the opportunity to interrupt. I have been delaying, but I can no longer do this. The fact that such an action would be reprehensible notwithstanding, Cheer said, as well as the fact that I, at least, would prevent such a thing. How would you intend to reach Directorate space? We know there are Hunters out there, and possibly pirates as well. There would be that risk involved, Triafa replied. Especially in light of the fact that the entire Hunter swarm have declared war on the human race. Any world or ship harboring a human has been threatened with annihilation. The stunned silence was as she had expected. Fear on all their features, but also determination. None of them was simply willing to give up on the human, be it from a sentimental or practical standpoint. They'd seen enough to have good reason to prefer having a human on board, regardless of the danger.
If we can expect another hunter attack, Trichlor said, it would be better to have him with us than for them to find us undefended.
Zrypop croaked agreement.
There's no way we can allow him to leave us undefended.
And yet, Triafa said, if we don't hand him over, the Directorate will undoubtedly come to fetch him. They would take the Zoddersill from me, and who knows what they would do to Adrian Saunders.
They might allow us to return home,
Zrypop pointed out. You have been aboard the Zoddersill, Triafa replied, ready for this point. They would not allow word of the discovery to spread.
You seem so sure,
Zrypop said suspiciously.
Could it be that this was also your plan?
Originally, yes, Triafa admitted. But circumstances have changed. I believe that action would ultimately be pointless. So presumably you have some sort of plan, Cheer asked. I cannot imagine why you would have called this meeting otherwise. Very astute, Gowan, Triafa said. I do indeed have a plan, but I will require all of your support to pull it off. When Adrian Saunders awoke, he was surprised to find himself in the familiar surrounds of the Zoddersill Medical Bay. Triafa was hovering nearby, working at one of the monitoring consoles. I thought I needed to go someplace else, he asked as he assessed his condition. At the very least, his eyes didn't hurt, his skin didn't itch, and his body didn't ache like it was being slowly pulled apart. I feel better, at least. You are better, Triafa replied, coming over to him and running a handheld scanner over his exposed skin. Or at least better than you were. My machines kept you alive long enough for your superior healing capabilities to do their work, but you deteriorated significantly before you improved while you were unconscious. You are not fully recovered yet, but you won't need to be stuck in here for the remainder. I thought you said you didn't have the facilities, he said. Did something change? You could say that, Triafa said. I wasn't sure if you'd survive a natural healing process, but necessity forced my hand. Adrian paused, his eyes narrowing on Triafa. What's happened this time? 2 things you need to know about, Triafa said. First of all, your victory against the Hunters has seen the entire Hunter swarm declare war against your species. They have threatened all those who harbor them. You don't seem that concerned about having me here, Adrian noted. We are already their target, whether you are here or not, Triafa explained with characteristic bluntness. You are a factor in our favor, and I do not wish to give you up, which brings me to my second topic. What's this one? Some sort of new disaster or hope-crushing event? I've been ordered to give you over to the Kortai Directorate, Triafa told him. They'll be wanting to dissect you.
Think of it like a game, Trichlor suggested. Except if you lose, you kill everyone.
That's real fucking reassuring, Adrian replied tersely, going over the controls again in his head before pressing the next button. A symbol appeared that he guessed meant good job or correct or something along those lines.
Good. Now the engines would be turned on,
Trichlor told him.
You won't get any forward momentum until...
Adrian thought, then pointed at the virtual control grid on the left of the simulator's center console. Until I drag this dot in this direction.
Correct,
Trichlor said, making her best attempt at a smile.
Not too far, though, because you'll slam the ship into the bulkhead and kill everyone.
Fuck's sake, Adrian hissed out between his teeth. This is a lot to remember all at once.
Don't you have spacecraft on your world?
Trichlor asked.
I seem to recall that your species had at least managed to get into space.
We do, Adrian said, a little more defensively than he would have liked. But we have joysticks, not stupid touchscreens with dots. Trichlor looked perplexed.
What's a joystick?
Adrian did his best to explain it to her. Then he found himself giving her a basic rundown on what he could recall of Earth's aviation history. It was bland stuff, or it was when he told it. But she had the decency to at least look interested, although she certainly perked up when he got to the part about jetpacks. He wondered if those would be possible in this futurist's wet dream. Probably. Had anyone made them yet? It certainly didn't look like it. Why am I learning all the details anyway? He asked when she finally returned his attention to the simulator. You said I could just tell the autopilot where to go and what to do.
You can do that, she agreed. But an autopilot can't get you out of a bad situation, and it can't react very well to unexpected events.
He sighed. Right, I guess we'll keep at it then. Thank you all for your assistance in this plan, Triafa said to the gathered soldiers. Today we'll be doing something really stupid,
but I believe that with Adrian's help, we have a chance of pulling it off.
Adrian shrugged. It's no more insane than anything I've done recently, he said, and I think it's got a better shot of working from what you've told me. And this time we have a contingency plan, Cheer added, gesturing towards Adrian. Although I feel that Adrian is the plan, maybe getting a bit stale. No shit, Adrian muttered. But I'm just the contingency plan. I don't see why the main plan won't work. From what you've said, everyone is shit scared of the hunters.
Quite, agreed Triafa. If anybody cares, we'll be leaving Beckmer in his little cell here while we're gone. He'll have enough sustenance, but I'm sure you won't be concerned if he starves a little.
I don't care if he starves a lot,
Adrian said unkindly, but not undeservedly.
How long have we got before the collectors arrive at the meeting zone?
5 sleep cycles, Triafa said, but we'll be leaving tomorrow. Get your rest, everyone. We've got quite the show to set up. Adrian exited stasis on another Kortai ship, and that was not a good sign. It meant that the handover had happened, and that the main plan had either failed or had failed to succeed before he awakened. No matter the case, it was time to engage his contingency plan, that being to kill everyone on board and take control of the ship. With a gentle push, he opened the pod and slipped over the side to drop onto the floor of the small room, taking what he had come to discover was called a fusion sword with him. There was no one around the pod, but there was a sense of tension in the air, the sense of something very important happening. He left the room quickly to avoid an unplanned jettisoning at an inopportune time, just in case the main plan finally worked. Somewhere out there were 3 hunter ships piloted by his friends, all making the demand of the Kortai vessel to eject its human cargo. That plan, had it succeeded, would have seen the Kortai write Adrian off as a loss. It would have seen them all go home safely none the wiser. Now it had to be Plan B. Those hunters have clearly never dealt with a sealed FTL before, said Shipmaster Crifty, gazing out into the warp corridor. A pity about Salvage Officer Triafa, however. He turned to Ship Second Tulkits. Make a note of that matter, Tulkits. Triafa did her duty to the Directorate well, far better than that fool Beckmer. As you say, Shipmaster, replied Tulkits immediately, and set about to do just that. What do you think she was attempting to warn us about before her ship was overtaken by the hunters? Probably the hunters, Crifty said. What else would she have to be so desperate about? I must say, however, that she was surprisingly unprofessional at the last. The death by a hunter is unsettling, Shipmaster, Tulkits replied. Personally, he couldn't think of a worse fate to experience. To be at the mercy of an unstoppable monster who did not know the meaning of the word. Such was the source of nightmares for any intelligent young Kortai with dreams of the stars. We will be back home soon enough, Tulkits, the shipmaster reassured him. Despite their threats, there is no way that the hunter swarm will descend upon our home world. I am sure it is as you say, Shipmaster, Tulkits replied, although he remained far from reassured. There had been 3 hunter ships. 3! Normally, nobody saw more than a single vessel at a time, and that was more than enough. Tulkits found himself continually glancing at the warp corridor as well, but not with the smug glory that his shipmaster did. He looked at it with dread. At least nothing had managed to get on board. Now that he was on board the Kortai vessel, Adrian took the time to be stealthy. It looked as though the crew were on high alert, but their attention was focused outward, not inward. And when he observed them from his hiding places, they seemed jumpy. Not jumpy enough to react in time when he descended upon them, his sword often cleaving through more than 3 at a time. He really hadn't had the chance to use a sword on Earth. But he didn't imagine that those varieties would cut quite so easily, nor that they would cauterize the wounds and leave the corridors bloodless. He hid the bodies as soon as they had fallen, dragging them into adjacent storage rooms and piling them into macabre little mounds. They had little more than their kinetic guns on them, however, and after the first few he refrained from any further strip searches. He'd learned more about Kortai anatomy than anybody ever wanted to know. 13, he counted, checking off the heads rather than fragmented body parts. I wonder when they'll start to miss them. The Endless Sequence was a Kortai heavy scout, capable of extended exploratory or reconnaissance missions, and was furnished with its own botanical facility to feed its crew of 60. Physically, it was almost as big as a light cruiser, but was twice as fast and half as deadly. It was the perfect vessel for transportation missions that valued speed over quantity. Yet it was only because the Endless Sequence had been nearby that the Directorate had commanded them to collect the human, and it was only because the threat of punishment outweighed the threats from the hunters that the shipmaster had complied. This was not,
he had explained. An order he could afford to overlook. And given the speed of the vessel, it was natural that they feel confident in the decision. Or at least they had until they had encountered the hunters at the rendezvous. They had barely managed to load the human before they had appeared, and had fired their ultimatum out across all channels. Rather than comply with the requests of such loathsome creatures, the endless sequence had fled with all haste, abandoning the small salvage ship to its grisly fate. Tulkits was fine with that much, however, if it meant not sharing that fate. He had waited some time before relaying the orders for all hands to return to their usual stations, wanting to be sure of no surprises. It was only then that he discovered the surprise. 13 crewmen had not returned to their regular stations. He did a quick scan, understanding why some might try and shirk their duties after such tension, and was puzzled to find all missing members hiding inside a storage room. "What," he asked aloud to the command deck, "is so interesting about storage compartment 37? Alright guys, that's going to be it for this one today. It is a double header today, so we got to have 2 of them instead of just one and then another one. But I will have another one tomorrow because it is going to be Shu Chang time. That's right, we've gotten through this chunk of salvage and we are on to Shu Chang. I am working on getting a playlist set up for all of them in order, with all 3 mixed in so that they're in the correct order, timeline and chronology wise. So look for that one here soon. But other than that, I'm so glad that you guys came by today, and I will see you next time. Bye, guys.